Namaste, good morning, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Sunday morning service. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Mritam Gamaya Aviravirmaedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Pahi Nityam Tena Mam Pahi Nityam. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourself, O Lord, and protect us evermore from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Om Vishnurva Tripurantako Bhavatu Va Brahma Surendrothava Bhanurva Shashalakshanota Bhagavan Siddhota Siddhotava Ragadvesha Visharti Moharahita Sattvanukampodyato Yas sarve saha samskrito gunaganais tasmai namah sarvada. The Supreme Reality and its messengers are known by various names in various traditions. But as for me, I offer my worship always to the one going by any name and belonging to any tradition, who is free from attachment and hatred, free from worldliness and delusion, who is filled with compassion towards all living beings and is possessed of all noble virtues. Om Mahadevyai cha vidmahe Vishnupatnyai cha dhimahi Tanno Lakshmi prachodayat. Om. May we meditate, we know that great goddess, may we meditate on the consort of Vishnu. May that Lakshmi illuminate our intelligence. Oh, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So today, after a long time, I'm taking up one of the deities of Hinduism in the series, The Gods and Goddesses of Hinduism, which as I've said on other occasions, one of our devotees, Peggy, who passed away a couple of years ago, she had asked me to do a series on the gods and goddesses to explain them. And so I took that up. But again, it's been just a number of months since I took one of those up. So for today, I decided to speak on Lakshmi. And as usual, I'll follow my usual approach in this series, talking about the name and its etymology, the history, the development of the idea of Lakshmi, which is from the human standpoint, but the same thing can be said to be the revelation of Lakshmi from her standpoint. So from a purely academic standpoint, where you look at these things just as ideas, human culture, human evolution, and so forth, then you see the development of the idea of Lakshmi and the development of the worship and things added into it and so forth. So it looks like a very human endeavor. That the Abrahamic tradition, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they say that man was created in the image of God. But this view, the academic view, is that God was created in the image of man. And there's truth to both of those. But it's only a half-truth, the human side of the development of the idea. Because the idea is developing because it's a living idea. It's a revelation from the other side, one could say, a revelation from the divine side. As we evolve, our intelligence evolves, our capacity to understand evolves, then our ability to understand the divine evolves as well. And so, as it were, we see more and more of the divine nature, the idea, the idea of the divine becomes more and more refined. Not because we are not because we are refining God, but because we are capable of understanding higher ideas. So you see that in all traditions. You find that in the early texts of the what the Christians call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, that God is often getting angry and cursing people and causing pestilence and other things on people. Because he gets angry, he's a jealous God, etc. But gradually there's a refinement of the idea of God and a reinterpretation of God. The God who walks in the Garden of Eden and plants a tree right in the center and tells Adam and Eve that you can eat from all of the fruits from all of the trees in the garden, but you're not to touch this one. And so, of course, he puts the most beautiful and most tempting tree right in the center where they have to pass it all of the time until finally they are tempted and they eat it. And then God curses them for having eaten what he knew they were going to do from the beginning. So gradually the idea of God evolves. And so, yes, the human side is there, the development of the idea, the refinement of the moral sense, the refinement of human values, where compassion and love become more important than jealousy and revenge and so forth. But that's from the human side. From the divine side, that is, more and more of it begins to shine through as the mind becomes more refined. So I'm going to speak about the history of the development of the idea of Lakshmi, and that's sort of an academic exercise, and it's true, but it's only half of the truth. So we should understand that that is the revelation of the divine nature coming through more and more. So I'll talk about the name, the etymology of the name, the history of the development of the worship of Lakshmi, something of the symbology and something of the worship of Lakshmi. So first let me say something about our Ramakrishna mission's connection to Lakshmi. And at first glance, it seems that the Ramakrishna movement doesn't have that much connection to Lakshmi. First of all, Ramakrishna himself, Thakur, was the embodiment of renunciation, and Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth, of beauty, of prosperity. And Sri Ramakrishna couldn't even touch money. So it's true that in the Ramakrishna movement, the worship of Lakshmi is not dominant. It certainly doesn't figure like the worship of Kali does in the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. But nonetheless, it is there. Of course, when from a traditional Hindu standpoint, when Sri Ramakrishna is considered an incarnation of Vishnu, then the Holy Mother is considered as an incarnation of Lakshmi. And then there is the stories that come down to us about the genesis of the Holy Mother. Before her birth, her father had a dream in which a beautiful, divine-looking little girl came from behind and clasped him around the neck and said, "I've come to you." And he thought when he woke up, because of her beautiful dress, beautiful appearance, and the lavish ornaments that this little girl was wearing, he thought that this was Lakshmi. And he was in search of a way to support his family. So he thought, well, this is an auspicious moment. Let me go into Calcutta and see if I can find work. So we don't know if he had any success at that. Of course, he never became well-to-do, but he had that experience of Lakshmi coming to him saying, "I am come to you." And right around the same time, his wife, Shyama Sundari, she had the experience where sitting in the dark, a little girl comes from behind and comes down from a tree with the jingling of her anklets, beautifully dressed, beautifully ornamented, and grabs her from behind around the neck with her gentle hands and says, "See, I am come to you." And so that she didn't say, "I am Lakshmi," but the mother had that sense. And she had the sense that from the time she went in, she fell unconscious when this happened. And when she came to, she felt that the girl somehow had entered into her womb. And so there's that association with Lakshmi. And then there's the the fact that Sri Ramakrishna sometimes referred to Holy Mother as Lakshmi. Of course, he also said that she was Saraswati, and he said that she was Kali as well. And so she was all of those, but there was the Lakshmi aspect of the Holy Mother. And you see in the difference between the Holy Mother and Sri Ramakrishna and certain things, the Lakshmi aspect more present in the Holy Mother. For instance, Sri Ramakrishna couldn't even touch money. But the Holy Mother, when she was given money, she would salute it as a symbol of Lakshmi. Swami Prabhavananda, who founded the centers in Southern California, he used to say that one might think that in a monastery there's no place for the worship of Lakshmi because the monastery or convent is about renunciation. But he said, no, even a monastic community needs provisions. It needs some stability for the worship of God and the practice of sadhana. So even there's the place for the worship of Lakshmi. And we know that Sri Ramakrishna's Advaita Guru, Totapuri, that not that he worshipped Lakshmi, he didn't worship any of the deities. He was just intent on realizing the self. But in consonance with what Swami Prabhavananda said, in his monastery in the Punjab, the monks, some of the monks, it was just, there were always 2 or 3 monks who were taught the science of the psychic power of turning base metal into gold. Now that might sound like a myth, and it might sound like, well, people have always believed in that. And in Europe for many centuries, people tried to learn how to turn base metal into gold. They thought it was just some process, partly chemical, partly magical, of turning base metal into gold. And so it looks like a lot of wasted effort. And so around the world, people had that idea of turning base metal into gold. But Sri Ramakrishna said that Totapuri had that knowledge and that they were sworn never to use it unless the monastery were in dire straits and in danger of disappearing for want of food and support. Then they were, only in those circumstances, they were allowed to use that power, a psychic power, to change metal into gold. So yes, there must have been a process by which they did it, but it was largely a psychic process, a siddhi. A psychic power, occult power, as it's called in English. Swami Atulananda, Guru Das Maharaj, one of the great saints of the order, a Dutch-American saint of the order who spent the last many years, half a century in India, where he died. He had, when he was practicing spiritual discipline at Shanti Ashram in California, he suddenly developed the power to change metal into gold. And if you read the life and teachings of Swami Atulananda, Guru Das Maharaj, you'll see that he was a completely no-nonsense person. He was a very skeptical, very pragmatic person in keeping with his Dutch and American heritage. And yet he said that he, at one time, he developed that power. He didn't use it, he said, because Swami Turiyananda had told him not to use psychic powers that he might develop, but he said that he had that power. So, again, Swami Prabhavananda said that even in a monastery devoted to renunciation, there is a place for the worship of Lakshmi, and at Belur Math on Lakshmi Puja, there is the worship of Lakshmi. So now coming to the name Lakshmi, it comes from the Sanskrit root laksh. So whether you want it or not, you'll get a little Sanskrit grammar today, as usual when I speak about the gods and goddesses. So the name Lakshmi comes from the verbal root, the dhatu, laksh, which means to aim, to mark, to indicate. It also means to perceive, to observe. And so some of the cognates of laksh, the words that come out of the verbal root laksh, again, as some of you know, the idea in Sanskrit, in Vyakarana and Sanskrit grammar, is that all words in Sanskrit come out of a verbal root. That the verbal roots, the dhatus, are the source of the whole language. And so it gives the idea of power, because verbs are the power of the language. And so out of these verbal roots, they're generative, they are fertile, they produce the language. And so out of laksh, to perceive, to note, to indicate, to aim, etc., comes laksha, which is a mark, an indication, a sign, something to aim at, an objective. And similar to that is lakshya, that which is to be kept in view, or a prize, or a target, something which is perceptible. Even in the Bengali, of course, Bengali is the closest of the Indo-European languages to Sanskrit. And so there's the lokka, lokka korini. I didn't notice lokka from laksha. Lokka korini. I didn't even notice it. That same verbal root. So in the Mundaka Upanishad, which we're studying now in the Upanishad class, there are a couple of verses in the second chapter of the second Mundaka. That is, for those who like references, it's 2.2.3 and 4 in the Mundaka Upanishad, where it says, Dhanur grihitva Upanishad Mahastram Sharam Hyupasa Nishitam Sandhaita Ayam Yatad Bhavagatena Chetasa Lakshyam, that word, Lakshyam, Tarevaksharam Somya Vidhi. So this says, Dhanur grihitva Upanishadam Mahastram, grasping the bow, like a bow and arrow, grasping the bow of the Upanishad, grasping the bow which comes from the Upanishad, the great weapon, the great weapon of the Upanishads. Sharam hi upasa nishitam santhaita. Taking an arrow, an arrow sharpened by meditation. You take an arrow sharpened by meditation. Ayam yatad bhavagatena chetasa. You put it on the string and then you pull the string. Ayamya. You pull the string, tad bhavagatena chetasa, with a mind absorbed in what you're doing. That is, the mind absorbed in the arrow, putting your mind, identifying the mind with the arrow as you pull it. Lakshyam tare vaksharam somya vidhi. Then know, O beautiful one, the teacher speaking to the disciple. A term in the Upanishads comes again and again, somya. The teacher often says to the disciple, somya. In fact, in the last class on the Upanishad, in another place, the teacher uses the same term, somya. O good-looking one, pierce that target, lakshyam, pierce the target, the lakshyam, which is the imperishable, that is Brahman. And then in the next verse, I won't repeat the whole verse, but the next verse, it says that the arrow is Om, taken from the Upanishads. And so identifying with Om, you pierce the target, which is Brahmatal Lakshyamuthyate. Brahman, the Absolute, is said to be the target. And so again, Lakshya as a target, as that which is to be kept in view, the prize, or that which is indicated. And then you get Lakshana, which is found in Sanskritic languages in India, Lakhon, or Lakshana, which means a sign, an attribute, a quality, or an indication by which we know something. Oh, the Lakshana, by this indication, I know what it is. Like one of the Lakshanas of fire is smoke. It's an indication that there's the presence of a fire when you see smoke. And then, of course, you get Lakshman, the brother of Rama. And Lakshman here is usually taken to mean full of auspicious signs. Again, Lakshya meaning to indicate, to mark, and so marked with auspicious signs, Lakshman, the brother of Rama. And then we come to Lakshmi, which means good fortune, again, because it can mean auspicious signs, Laksha and Lakshana. So it means one who is of good fortune It means beauty, again from the idea of good signs, wealth, luster, full of auspicious signs like Lakshman, and hence she came to be identified as the goddess of wealth and of beauty, both. So, of course, there are many other names of Lakshmi. Aishwarya, which means she who is the powerful one and full of divine authority and divine power. Anagha, she who is without any stain or any evil. Padma, because Lakshmi, as we'll see, from the earliest times, she's associated with the lotus. And so Padma, she who is associated with the Padma, with the lotus, and Kamala, associated with the lotus as well. Vaishnavi, she who is the consort of Vishnu. Hari Priya, she who is dear to Hari or Vishnu. Narayani, she who is the associate of Narayana, another name of Vishnu, of course. And then there are many, many other names of Lakshmi. It's now coming to the history of the origins of Lakshmi. She's mentioned once in the mantras of the Rig Veda. Or I should say, she's not mentioned, but her name is mentioned in a phrase which is Bhadraisham Lakshmir Nihitadhi Vachi, which means an auspicious fortune attached to their words, an auspicious fortune attached to their words. So Lakshmi here means auspicious fortune. So you see from the very first appearance of the word in the Veda, it is associated with fortune and with good fortune and auspiciousness. So auspicious fortune, a sign of auspicious fortune. And so later in the Atharva Veda, so in the Rig Veda, the mantras, the Samhita of the Rig Veda, the word is found once. But as we'll see, it's actually found a number of other times in verses that are considered to be appendices that were added into the Veda later. But in the Atharva Veda, she's mentioned a number of times. It's said, again, before she's mentioned as a goddess, it's said in the Atharva Veda that a baby is born with 100 Lakshmis, where Lakshmi means signs. So a baby is born with 100 Lakshmis. Some are papi, that is, they are bad signs, and some are punya. Some are good signs. So a child is born with 100 Lakshmis, some good, some bad. The bad are to be urged to go, and the good are to be cultivated. So that's what it says. And oftentimes in the Atharva Veda, the word Lakshmi is used to indicate good fortune, an auspicious sign, prosperity, etc. Punya Lakshmi is used a lot in that sense of a good sign, etc. And then in the Shatapatha Brahmana, part of the Vedas, but after the Samhita portion, after the Rig Veda, she is recognized as the goddess of good fortune. And there she is identified with Shri. First you find Shri as a goddess, and Lakshmi, there's not an association with them. But in the Shatapatha Brahmana, the two are identified, Shri and Lakshmi, as the same. And in the Brahmana of the Veda, again, we're speaking of the Vedas, of course, so very ancient times, before the war of the Mahabharata, before all of that. So this is thousands and thousands of years ago. She's mentioned in several creation stories. At one point, at the of creation, she is seen sitting on a lotus, floating on the primordial waters of Prakriti, out of which creation comes. So she appears, again, this is in the Veda, she appears seated on a lotus. So you see, from that ancient time, from thousands of years ago, the roots of Indian civilization, Lakshmi is already a goddess, and she's associated with good fortune, with prosperity, and with the lotus. And then in another creation story in the Brahmana, Prajapati, the grandfather, Brahma, the creator, he performs intense tapasya in order to create the universe. Prajapati figures very large in the Vedas, and so he performs intense tapasya to create the universe. And Lakshmi, as a goddess, emerges from his meditation. As one of the effects of his meditation, the goddess comes. And the other gods, and again, remember the Vedic gods were they had their good and bad qualities. They had their weaknesses and their strengths, even in the Vedic times. And when she appears, this lustrous, beautiful goddess appears, then they're enchanted by her. But then their enchantment turns to envy. They want to possess her, and then they want to possess her power. And so they decide to kill her in order to take her glory and her power. And then Prajapati says, no woman is ever to be killed. So this is the genesis of that idea, which is repeated other times in the Brahmanas and elsewhere, and then through the Dharma Shastras and so forth, that a woman is never to be killed. That's one of the great sins, is to kill a woman. And so Prajapati says to the other gods, no woman is ever to be killed. If you approach her properly and propitiate her, she will give you her gifts. And so the gods do that. Indra, Varuna, Aditya, and others. They go and pray to her, and to each one of them she gives a gift of her power. She gives authority to one, she gives dominion to another, she gives a splendor to one, she gives heroic energy to one of the gods, she gives beauty to one of them, she gives nourishment to another. So you see all of these qualities, which are later continuing down to the present day, associated with Lakshmi. They are at this time even in the Brahmanas of the Vedas associated with Lakshmi, that she is the possessor of these qualities. And the idea that by propitiating her, not by demanding from her, but by going to her with love and devotion and propitiating her, she will share her riches. So then, still within the Vedas, there are appendices, as I said, to the Rig Veda, which are Kilanis. They're called Kilanis, Kilanis, which are verses that were added into the different mandalas of the Samhita, but they're recognized as later additions, not just by modern scholars, but they were recognized since ancient times as Kilanis that were added in. They were added in long before the time of the Buddha. So this itself was in ancient times. It's just that the Rig Veda Samhita comes from the dawn of history. And it's the most ancient part of the Vedic literature. And then came the other Vedas, and then the Brahmanas, and then the Aranyakas, then the Upanishads. So these Kilanis themselves were inserted into the Samhita portion of the Rig Veda, the earliest part of the Vedic literature, but that itself happened at an early time. And these Kilanis, these appendices, were contemporaneous with the Sama Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Atharva Veda. So when these other Vedas came to be, again, first you had the Rig Veda, and then the derivative Vedas, so the Sama, Yajur, Atharva. The Kilanis are contemporaneous with those. So still it's in the very ancient Vedic period. So there's the Sri Sutton, which is in one of these Kilanis, one of these appendices. It was added to the fifth mandala of the Rig Veda, the Sri Sutton. And here again, Sri and Lakshmi are identified. Sri and Lakshmi are recognized as the same goddess. And so that is, you know, in the continuing Hindu tradition, Sri was another name for Lakshmi. And also in this text, the Sri Sukta, the two of them, Lakshmi and Sri, identified, are also associated with fire. And also here, we find, again, the association with the lotus. And we also find an association that comes down to the present day of the identity of, or the association of Lakshmi with the elephant. So you find the association with fire, the identity of Sri and Lakshmi. You find the identity with the lotus, with the elephant, etc. And so let me read a little bit of the translation of the Sri Sutton. It's a beautiful hymn. And just to give you an idea, at this very early time, some of the ideas of Lakshmi that later come down to us. Invoke for me, O Agni. Again, it's first addressing Agni, the god of fire, because the fire was the face of all of the gods, the mouth of the gods. But in Sanskrit, as you know, in Indian languages, at least the Sanskritic languages, I don't know about all of the Dravidian languages, but the Sanskritic language, like in Bengali, if you say hat, meaning hand, the hand can be this or the hand can be this. And the foot can be this or the foot can be this. And so the mouth can be this or the mouth can be this. And so Agni is the mouth of the gods, but also the face of the gods. Face of the gods because it's what we see of the gods. It's visible. It's here on earth. And the mouth of the gods because we pour oblations into it. So Agni was the principal deity. Even though Indra was the head of all of the gods, head of Agni too, Agni was the most important because he was the visible god and so he's often addressed in hymns. In fact, in the puja, when we do puja, when we give a bath to the deity, whichever deity we're worshiping, we chant the first verse of each of the four Vedas, and most of those are addressing Agni. Agni mile purohitam yajñasya devam ritwijam. So we're addressing Agni as the purohit, as the priest of the gods. So it starts by addressing Agni. Invoke for me, O Agni, the goddess Lakshmi, who shines like gold, yellow in hue, wearing gold and silver garlands, blooming like the moon, the embodiment of wealth. So again, this association with gold, the association with silver, the association with wealth, the association with beauty, blooming like the moon. O Agni, invoke for me that unfailing Lakshmi, being blessed by whom I shall win wealth, cattle, horses, and men. I invoke Sri, that is again where the Lakshmi and Sri are identified. I invoke Sri, who has a line of horses in front of her, a series of chariots in the middle, who is being awakened by the trumpeting of elephants. So again, the association with elephants, who is divinely resplendent. May that divine Lakshmi grace me. I hereby invoke that Sri, who is an embodiment of absolute bliss. So she is Ananda itself, who is of a pleasant smile, whose luster is like that of burnished gold. So again, the association with gold. Who is wet, as it were, and that is said to be wet, as it were, because she, as we'll see, and as most of you know already, but as we'll see in the narration that I'm giving, she emerged from the milky ocean when the ocean was churned by the Devas and Asuras. So she is wet, as it were, from the milky ocean. Who is blazing with splendor and is the embodiment of the fulfillment of all wishes. So she is the one who fulfills the wishes of all, who satisfies the desires of her votaries, who is seated on the lotus and is beautiful like the lotus. And so many of the names of Lakshmi, again, I've mentioned a couple of them, but there are many other names where Padmakshi, she whose eyes are like a lotus, Padmamukhi, she whose face is like a lotus, Padmadhara, she who's holding the lotus, etc. For shelter in this world, I resort to that Lakshmi who is beautiful like the moon, who shines bright, who is blazing with fame, who is adored even by the gods, who is highly magnanimous and grand like the lotus. May my misfortunes perish. I surrender myself to thee, O thou resplendent like the sun. By thy power and glory have the plants like the bel tree or bilwa tree grown up. May the fruits thereof destroy through thy grace all inauspiciousness rising from the inner organs and from ignorance, as well as from the outer senses. So again, she's associated with wealth, with prosperity, with beauty, but she's also associated with spiritual wealth and purification. O Lakshmi, I am born in this country with a heritage of wealth. May the friend of Lord Shiva, Kubera, and Kirti, fame, come to me. May these, having taken their abode with me, bestow on me fame and prosperity. I shall destroy the elder sister of Lakshmi. The elder sister of Lakshmi, that is Alakshmi. So if there is Lakshmi, there has to be Alakshmi as well. Alakshmi meaning the opposite of Lakshmi. That is that which is inauspicious, that which is evil, that which is dark, that which is deprived, etc. So skipping down a little bit, I invoke hereby that Lakshmi who's, again, so it goes from Sri to Lakshmi to Sri to Lakshmi, identifying the two. I invoke hereby that Lakshmi whose avenue of perception is the sense of smell, who is incapable of defeat or incapable of being threatened by anyone, who is ever healthy, and who is supreme over all created beings, whose grace is seen abundantly in cows. O Lakshmi, may we obtain and enjoy the fulfillment of our desires, and so forth. Invoke for me, O Agni, Lakshmi, who shines like gold, is brilliant like the sun, who is powerfully fragrant, who wields the rod of suzerainty, who is the form of supreme rulership, who is radiant with ornaments and is the goddess of wealth, etc. And it ends with what I began with, that is the Lakshmi Gayatri, which is Om Mahadevyai cha Vidmahe Vishnu Patnyai cha Dhimahi Tanno Lakshmi Prachodayat. We commune with the great goddess and meditate on the consort of Vishnu. May that Lakshmi illuminate our hearts. And so again, this is from the Sri Sutton, which is from one of the Kilanis, written in the Vedic period, inserted into the Rig Veda Samhita. So a very ancient hymn where you see that the Lakshmi is already emerging as a fully formed goddess. Then when we come to the Itihasas, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, we find there that she is a fully formed goddess. She is the goddess of beauty. She's the goddess of wealth, the goddess of everything that is auspicious, good fortune, charm, the goddess of splendor, etc. And she becomes associated in the Itihasas with Vishnu. So here in this Sri Sukta, we don't find mention of Vishnu. Vishnu was still a minor deity. A deity in the Vedas, but a minor deity. But by the time of the Itihasas, that association with Vishnu is already present. So in the Ramayana, Sita is said to be an incarnation of Lakshmi, as Rama is an incarnation of Vishnu. And also in the Ramayana is where you get the story, or one of the places where you get the story of the churning of the ocean between the Devas and Asuras. They churn the ocean of the primordial ocean in order to extract the nectar from it, the nectar of immortality. But as they're doing that, various things come out of that ocean. And one of the things that comes out of the ocean is Lakshmi holding a lotus. She emerges from the ocean of nectar. So Lakshmi is also known by the name of Samudra Suta. Samudra Suta, she who is born from the ocean. Samudra Suta, because she was born from the churning of the primordial ocean. In the Mahabharata, Draupadi is considered to be a partial incarnation of Lakshmi. And so just as Vishnu incarnates in human form, so Lakshmi from an early period, from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, Lakshmi is associated with the incarnation as well. And the association of Vishnu and Lakshmi is understandable because the nature of Vishnu is the protector, the preserver of the universe, the upholder of the universe. And for that, of course, the wealth, plenty, abundance, fertility, all of that is needed for the preservation. And so there was a natural association between Vishnu, as he came to be seen as the preserver, and Lakshmi as the goddess of wealth, beauty, prosperity, good fortune, etc. So, as I said, in the Mahabharata, Draupadi is considered to be a partial incarnation of Lakshmi. So you see, this is an idea that comes down to the present in India, where there are partial incarnations of different deities. Sri Ramakrishna said that Swamiji was a partial incarnation of Shiva, among many other things. He was also one of the 7 primordial rishis. Holy Mother said he was Bharata itself, that is, the country. He was the spirit of the land, the country India, the civilization India. So Draupadi was a partial incarnation, and also later Rukmini, the principal queen of Krishna, of his many wives. Rukmini was the principal of the wives, and she's considered also an incarnation of Lakshmi. So when we come to the association with Vishnu, we find that she's called Vishnu Maya, Vishnu Mayeti Samstita, as it's said in the Chandi. So she is the Maya of Vishnu, that is the creative power of Vishnu. She's also Vishnu Moya, Vishnu Maya and Vishnu Moya. That is, she is the embodiment of Vishnu. And Vishnu Maya, she's the power of Vishnu. And she is identified with Prakriti, that is the primordial nature. She is Prakriti. Then there, of course, is the idea of Lakshmi Narayana, where in one image there either Lakshmi Narayana as 2 deities together, the consorts Vishnu and Lakshmi, or Lakshmi half Vishnu and half Lakshmi. Half of the form is, or it would be the right side, half of the form is Vishnu, and the left side is Lakshmi. And so in the tradition of worship of Lakshmi, especially among the Vaishnavas and the Shaktas who worship Lakshmi, she is often considered to be more approachable than Vishnu. And so devotees go to her, thinking her to be more easily propitiated than Vishnu. It says in the Christian tradition, where Mary, in the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches, where the worship of Mary is prevalent, they don't do that in Protestant churches, but in Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches they do. They approach Mary because she is said to be more easily propitiated than Jesus. So if they have a prayer, they go to, not everyone, you can pray directly to Jesus, and many do. But many who are worshipers of Mary, they think that because she has a mother's heart. She has the heart of a mother, the tender heart of a mother, so she will be more easily pleased with prayer and devotion, and she will convince Jesus, now Jesus, you do the right thing. So, so the idea is there with Lakshmi and Vishnu also, that Lakshmi having the heart of a mother, she and also having the ear of Vishnu. So the heart of a mother, easily approachable by us, and having the ear of Vishnu, she can tell Vishnu what we need and get him to do it. So, and there's the further belief that when Vishnu incarnates, that his Shakti Lakshmi also incarnates. And so with Krishna, with Rama and Sita, even with Parashurama and other previous incarnations also, there is the idea developed that each of them had a Shakti. And then Vishnu Priya and Sri Chaitanya and then Sri Ramakrishna and the Holy Mother. That idea that Lakshmi incarnates when Vishnu incarnates, as well as she can incarnate on her own. So you find, just as we find with other deities in Hinduism, you find that Shiva sometimes is considered one of the 3 Murti, but by the devotees of Shiva, Shiva is the whole of reality. He's not one part of a triune God where the other 2 have to be present too. No, Shiva is everything. And so with the goddess, with Lakshmi or Durga or Kali or whomever, she has these relationships to the other gods and to children and so forth, these familial relationships among the gods. But to the devotees of Lakshmi, she is everything. And so You find oftentimes that she is pictured and worshipped independently. So she's associated with Vishnu, as I said. She's also, as I said, associated with Gaja, with the elephant. And so sometimes she is, one of her names is Gaja Lakshmi, the Lakshmi of the elephants, or Lakshmi associated with the elephants. So usually in images of Lakshmi, you'll find at least one and oftentimes two elephants on either side of her. And so the elephant is associated in Indian thought with the rain clouds, the monsoon clouds, because of the huge size and the gray color of the elephant. They're associated with the rain clouds. They're associated with the rains itself. You know how the elephant, from its trunk, it spews water out. And so often in the images of Lakshmi, she's seated here and elephants on either side with their trunks pouring water out. And so the elephants are associated with clouds, rain clouds, associated with rain, and thereby the elephant is associated with fertility, with agriculture, and furthermore, the elephant is a symbol of royal authority, of that which is regal. And so Lakshmi being the queen of the universe and being the most beautiful object in the universe. She is the queen, and therefore she has elephants as well. So all of these associations are there. The elephant also is a symbol of strength, of work, of activity, of power. And so that also, Lakshmi is unfailing, as it said in one of the lines I quoted from the Sri Sutton from the Vedas. She's unfailing in her actions. And so all of these associations of the elephant are there with her. The Vahana, every Hindu deity has a vehicle, some animal that they ride on, not a chariot or a tricycle or anything like that. They have an animal that they ride on. And so hers is the owl, and particularly the white owl. And so the owl is called Uluka or Pechaka. In Bengal, I think it's usually more known as Pechaka. In some parts of India, more known as Uluka. But both refer to the owl. And the owl in India also, as it does in the West, it symbolizes wisdom, discernment. And also the owl, of course, as we know, has the quality of seeing at night, seeing in darkness. And so, but the owl also is said to be blinded by too much light. And so that is a reminder to the devotee of Lakshmi that yes, she is the goddess of wealth. She's the goddess of splendor. She's the goddess of priceless metals, gold and silver and so forth. But that the devotee should not be blinded by prosperity and wealth. Like the owl is blinded by the bright sun. We should not be blinded by the splendor and the wealth and splendor of Lakshmi. So we should be like the owl who looks in the dark for sees the light in the midst of darkness, that is looking for the spiritual light. As I've said several times, of course, and as you know, Lakshmi is closely associated from the earliest times with the lotus. And so she's known, as I said, as Kamala, as Padma Priya, to whom the lotus is dear, Padma Maladhara, she who is wearing the garland of lotuses, and she's Padma Mukhi, her face is like a lotus. Padmakshi, she whose eyes are like the petals of a lotus. Jalaja, which means lotus, that which is born out of water, but she also is said to be Jalaja, one of her names, because she was born from the ocean of nectar, and she also was in the earliest stories of creation in the Shatapatha Brahmana, as I said. When the waters of creation, when Prajapati is beginning to create out of the waters of Prakriti, she appears floating on a lotus on the ocean of Prakriti, primordial nature. And so as her association with the lotus, of course, is an ancient symbol in India from the Vedic times, a symbol of purity, a symbol of beauty, a symbol of love and devotion, human love and divine love, and a symbol of illumination. The lotuses within the chakra system are also where spiritual experience takes place. So all of these associations, the goddess of wealth. And so there's a value to having an image of beauty, of prosperity, etc. Yes, the ultimate goal of for Vedanta and for Hinduism is illumination, is mukti. But the vast majority of human beings are not ready to seek wholeheartedly mukti. Even if you try to force them, you won't have any luck. And you'll end by just degenerating religion, because people will bring it down to their own level if you try to force them to take to a high level of religion. And so there's a great value culturally and for civilization of having this image of prosperity, of wealth, of plenty, because civilization can only exist when there is agriculture, when there is fertile land, when there is water, when there is sustenance, when there is shelter, when there are the necessities of life. And so to have an image, a divine image of the divine who manifests as a god or goddess of plenty, of prosperity, again, that's the foundation of society. Where you don't have that, where people have to scratch the soil just for bare subsistence, then civilization doesn't grow. And so this image of beauty, this image of auspiciousness, there's so much in life which is suffering. Not all of life is suffering, but there's so much of life where there's so much suffering in life. There's so much in life that is so many things that happen which are inauspicious. And so to have an image of auspiciousness, of prosperity, of beauty, etc., that serves a great need of civilization. Swami Vivekananda said that only one who has the attitude of a king can really renounce the world. If you feel that, well, I can't have the world anyway, I'm poor, I'm desperate, and I'm never going to get anything, so I might as well renounce the world because I can't have it anyway, that you can't do it. The mind will always be longing for that which you don't have. And so he said that people need the opportunity for enjoyment. They need the opportunity for prosperity. It's only when you've had that the mind says, even this I don't want. Even this I want. I want that which is not subject to the changes of nature. And then the great renunciation comes. And then Lakshmi becomes a symbol of spiritual wealth, not material wealth. But for the vast majority of people, they're seeking prosperity. They're seeking enjoyment. They're seeking artha, kama, dharma, the three purusharthas before moksha. And moksha will be possible for those who seek kama, sense pleasure, artha, possession, wealth, etc., and dharma, as long as they follow dharma as well. If you pursue wealth and sense pleasure in a dharmic way, you're not destroying your chances for moksha. Rather, you are fulfilling your dharma and getting your fill of life and experience until the mind says, okay, I've had it. I've had it. I don't need any more. You can't take that away from people. You can't take that away prematurely from people. Because as Sri Ramakrishna said in another context, he was speaking of work, but if you have a scab and you try to peel the scab off prematurely, it just keeps bleeding. And so people need to have the opportunity to seek the good things of life if that's what they want. If a person already knows that no, from their youth, if they know that no, that's not enough, that's not what I want to go for the ultimate, then that's very blessed. That's very blessed. But those are few. And so again, there's a great value to the this image. Again, the Holy Mother, she would always, when given money, she would touch the coin or the bill to her forehead as Lakshmi. She would respect it. And so it said, even in our monasteries, that there's certain things that you should not do because it scares Lakshmi away. And that's the deep psychological truth behind that, because prosperity is very easy to scare away. Hard to secure, easy to scare away. And so loud noises when I was at Mayavati, the Advaitashrama, in the Himalayas, where we didn't worship any gods or goddesses, not even Sri Ramakrishna, etc., but the practice of non-dualism. But in the dining hall in those days, now I can't remember if they still, I don't think they still have those, use those at Mayavati, but in those days we had those brass thalis, the big brass flat plates and brass bowls and brass tumblers made out of bell metal. And so if you hit one to another, then it makes a loud ringing sound. And so if that happened while we were eating, when we had one of the swamis in charge of the hospital while I was there, Gaur Maharaj, who passed away many years ago, Swami Sri Vatsananda. If anybody hit two of the vessels together and made that ringing sound, he said, "Doro, doro, 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 doro." Hold it to get it to stop ringing, because that sound will drive Lakshmi away. So I'm not saying this that everyone should do this, because that's a tradition. It's a belief, and so I'm not saying that everyone should have that belief. But the purpose behind it is that Lakshmi is easily scared away. And so I suffered from that one time. I think it was my first Lakshmi Puja in India when I was in training center. This would have been 1975. So it was a Lakshmi Puja day, and I was not that interested in Lakshmi, and it wasn't a major puja at Belur Math. I, of course, went to Kali Puja and Durga Puja and Shivaratri and things, but Lakshmi Puja, I wasn't that interested. And I was trying to master Sanskrit. I was studying Sanskrit all of my free time, studying Sanskrit. So I decided to stay in my room and study Sanskrit. And so I knew that supper was going to be late that night, because of the puja. Not very late, but a little bit late. It would be delayed because of the puja. It's not like Kali Puja, which goes on all night, but a little bit late. So I was waiting in my room, waiting to hear the bell for supper time. And I waited and I waited and I waited. There's no bell, nothing's happening, nobody's coming back from the temple. And I just kept thinking, well, the puja is going on a really long time. So then suddenly I hear the commotion of brahmacharis coming back to the training center, and they're all carrying their plates and glasses, because the brahmacharis have to take care of their own plates and glasses. The others, they're people to wash the plates and glasses, but brahmacharis have to do their own. So you carry them to the dining hall, you bring them back. So they're all coming back with their thalas, which means that they've eaten. So I got and said, what happened? I said, we were wondering where you were. Why didn't you come to supper? I've been sitting here all this time waiting for the bell. Lakshmi Puja, there's no bell. No, even in the puja, you don't ring the bell when you're doing the waving of incense and things, because she's scared away by loud noises. So that night was a bad night for me. I was terribly hungry. So if ever you're in a Hindu monastery or temple, don't wait for the bell on Lakshmi Puja night, because you won't get it. So Lakshmi, not making loud noises, keeping a light on. Sri Ramakrishna was insistent on that is a Lakshmi. It will bring a Lakshmi if you don't keep a light on in the house. Always keep a light on in the house, he would say. He would, people who would wear torn clothes, he would say, don't do that. Of course, if somebody's a beggar and they have nothing else, that's different. But for ordinary people to wear torn clothes, he'd say, no, you change your clothes. That also once, before I knew about that, when I was in training center that first year, Brahmachari, one of my friends from Nagpur, he came up to me and he took my shirt and ripped it like that. What are you doing? Your shirt is torn. Not because he tore it, because he saw a little tear in it. So he put his finger in that and ripped it open so I couldn't wear it. I said, you're not to wear torn clothes. So then I had to go get another shirt. but not to wear torn clothes, not to turn all the lights off in the house, not to make loud noises, and to keep things relatively neat and clean. All of those things attract Lakshmi. They attract prosperity. And so the ideas are good. If you have these ideas, again, I'm not trying to support superstitions and things like that, but there's a psychological principle behind these things. It's not just pure superstition. There is a psychological principle behind them. So let me say before I close that beyond, Lakshmi has gone, like many of the other deities, gone beyond Hinduism. So Lakshmi is worshipped in Tibet. She's the special protector deity of the Gelugpas, the Gelug order of Tibetan Buddhism. That's the order, the major order of the four main orders of Tibetan Buddhism: the Gelugs, the Nyingmas, Kargyus, etc. The Gelugpas are the largest and the main order of Tibetan Buddhism. That's the order that the Dalai Lama belongs to. And so Lakshmi is the main protectress of the Gelugpas. And she's even from the earliest existing stupas and Buddhist cave temples that we have. Lakshmi is pictured in the earliest of the stupas that we have, and in the earliest cave temples, the Buddhist cave temples as well. Lakshmi is there. She's often known as Vasudhara, and she's worshipped in, as I said, in Tibet, in Nepal, in Southeast Asia, Southeast Asian countries. She's worshipped in China and Japan. I don't remember the Chinese and Japanese names, but in China she's known by several different names, but widely worshipped in China. Widely worshipped in Japan, an important deity in Japan. And she's worshipped as Devi, with a W instead of a V, Devi, the way they pronounce it, in Bali. As you know, Bali is a Hindu country, but the Hinduism there is very different because it went long ago to Bali and was separated for more than 1,000 years from India. And so it developed in its own way. But Devi Shri is worshipped, who is Lakshmi, is one of the principal deities in Bali. And she's the goddess of fertility and agriculture. And in China and Japan also, she's the goddess of abundance, the goddess of wealth, the goddess of prosperity, the goddess of beauty, of agriculture, etc. So in all of these forms, we find, again, this ancient tradition coming down from the Vedas to the present day that we see in Lakshmi. So finally, it's time to conclude. So let me conclude by, I'll just mention, I brought them up here, so at least let me mention them since they're sitting here. I brought the Lalita Sahasranama, because Lalita is a form of the deity who sort of spans the Vaishnava and the Shaiva, and sometimes she has aspects of Durga, etc., and sometimes she has aspects of Lakshmi. In fact, in the Lalita Sahasranama, the 1,000 names of Lalita, let's see if I can find it. Yes, one of her names is Mano Rupekshu Kodanda. Mano Rupekshu Kodanda. Salutation to her who wields in her upper left hand a sugarcane bow, a bow made out of sugarcane, which stands for the mind. And so Lakshmi is often pictured with that. She's also a salutation to her who is Panchatanmatra Sakaya, she who holds the 5 arrows in another hand, which represent the Tanmatras, the subtle elements. Which is in Lakshmi's hand oftentimes. And she who holds the Ankusha, the goad, which often is pictured in one of Lakshmi's hands. And then the Pasha, the noose. Actually, noose is not a correct translation because noose is used only for hanging people. So it's not that the Lakshmi is holding a noose to hang people. It's the Pasha, it's more like a lasso. But it's the lasso of love. Is that that she can be held by the lasso of love. Through love, one can gain Lakshmi, and she holds us with the tie of love as well. And so these are emblems in the hands of usually of Lakshmi. And so Lalita is pictured in that. The Lalita Sahasranama is an example of the 1,000-name literature of India, which is a beautiful form of literature. It's like the litanies in the Roman Catholic tradition, which is also a beautiful tradition, where one addresses different aspects of Jesus in a litany of names. O Lord, you who are, O Lord, you who are, O Lord, you are. Or to Mary, O Mary, Mother of God, O Mary, portal whence the light of the world has arisen, O Mary, and the various epithets of Mary. And so in the Lalita Sahasranama, it's 1,000 different epithets for Lakshmi. And so you can chant through the whole thing where it's in verse form, where it's beautifully put together, verses made of the names. There's nothing else but names. And so it's a difficult form of literature to write. But the Lalita Sahasranama is one of those which is one of the most beautiful and recited by many people every day. The Lalita Sahasranama, beautiful practice. And one can use it in worship also, like Om Shri Matre Namaha. And one can offer a flower to her. You have to have 1,000 flowers. So you better be ready if you start it. But with every one, you take the names out of the verses, and you take each name from the verse, and you put it in the fourth case, the dative case, that to which you give something. And say, Om Shri Matre Namaha. That's the first name in the Sahasranama. In fact, let's see, let me get to the beginning. It's Om Shri Mata Shri Maharagni Shri Mansimhasaneshwari. So it begins Shri Mata, the mother who is the auspicious mother. And it also means the mother who is Shri. And Shri Maharagni, the great queen. Shri, who is the great queen, and then she who is the goddess who sits on the Simhasana, the royal throne, etc. Well, my favorite comes in where is it? Oh, it's the next name in the first verse, second line of the first verse. Chidagni Kumbhasam Bhuta. She who was born from the kumbha, the altar, which contains the Vedic fire, but the fire of consciousness. So she was born from the sacrificial fire of consciousness. That is where Lakshmi comes from. So Chidagni Kumbha Sambhuta, a beautiful name. So again, by going through that, there is 1,000 names of Ramakrishna now. But even the Shatanama, Sri Ramakrishna, 100 names of Ramakrishna is very beautiful. Because when you go through the 100 names of Sri Ramakrishna, it tells in short form his whole life. So you're reminded of his whole life. Then it tells about his austerities. It tells about his gunas, his qualities, his divine qualities. And then it has the prayers to Sri Ramakrishna. And so when you go through those 100 names, so each name is like a prayer to Ramakrishna in one part of it. And so when you go through that, you go through his whole life story. You're reminded of his whole life story. You're reminded of his qualities. You're reminded of his austerities. You're reminded of his powers. You're reminded of powers and glories. And you're reminded, there's also his teachings, a section on his teachings, Upadesha Nama. And then all of these things you're reminded of. So this is Lalita Sahasranama. And there are other things also that sort of span the Shaiva and the Vaishnava aspect of the goddess. Even in the Chandi, which is considered to be mainly about Durga, it has Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Durga, and Kali in it. And so for the worshippers of the goddess, the goddess takes on these different forms. And so it's not that one, depending on whether one's Vaishnava or Shaiva or something, one can only worship Lakshmi, or one can only worship Parvati or Durga or Kali or whatever. No, the goddess is the goddess and manifests in these different forms. So to conclude, let me just conclude by repeating what I already said, and that is that there's a great value to civilization of having an image of prosperity, an image of fullness, an image of fulfillment. Because so much of life is difficult, and we have to struggle for existence. We have to struggle to maintain ourselves. And to have an ideal where that is in the fullness of the divine being, everything is provided. And so the idea of Lakshmi is not that she's just for business people to worship before they go to business so they can make a lot of money. No. Even Holy Mother's parents, her father was a great devotee of Lakshmi. They never had much money. They never had much of any money, but they always had enough. They always had enough to support themselves. So again, the idea of Lakshmi is not, let me get rich, let me get richer than Bill Gates, let me surpass Elon Musk, and so forth. No. There are people who worship her for that, and that's okay. And let them do it. But for a spiritual aspirant, no, she's the image of both of spiritual knowledge, but of the sustenance that we need here. And so Holy Mother's father didn't go about complaining, saying that I worship Lakshmi all of this time, and still I'm in poverty. No, he had what he needed. She is the one who gives us what we need, that we will not be in need. And so Holy Mother again, and the last thing I'll say is that Holy Mother again shows her Lakshmi nature when she prayed to Sri Ramakrishna after the passing away of Sri Ramakrishna. And she saw the young disciples wandering around with hardly food to eat. Many days they went hungry, no place to stay except for a broken down house that was haunted by ghosts and full of serpents. And so she prayed to Sri Ramakrishna when she saw the Buddhist monasteries in Gaya. She said, here I see that the monks have plenty of food and they have a place to live. May your children have that. May your children not wander about for want of food and shelter and clothing. At the Baranagore Monastery, they only had one suit of clothing. All of them were in loincloths, kopinas. That's all that all of them had, except there was one Punjabi and dhoti that was shared among all of them. If they had to go out for anything, then that one that went out would put on the shirt and the dhoti. They had nothing. Sometimes they didn't even have salt to put on their rice. And sometimes the only thing they had to eat with rice was the wild greens growing in the jungle. So she prayed, oh Lord, may they never suffer for want of food, clothing, and shelter. And Sri Ramakrishna granted that blessing. And so the Ramakrishna movement is sustained by that blessing of Lakshmi in the form of the Holy Mother. So with that, I'll close. Now I'll give announcements, and if there are any questions, I'll take those. So on Tuesday, we will have the class on the Mundaka Upanishad at the usual time, 7:30. On Thursday, we'll have the gospel class at the usual time at 11 o'clock in the morning. And then, as you know, on Friday, Swami Sarvadevananda is coming. Not this coming Friday. Oh, thank God. I started thinking, is it this Friday? No. Thank God it's not. Not because I wouldn't like to see him earlier, but because we're not ready. So yes. So let me start over with the announcements. On Tuesday, there will be the Mundaka Upanishad class. Thursday, there will be the gospel class. And next Sunday, I will speak on the art and science of meditation. The art and science of meditation, because it's part science and part art. Science meaning that part of it is learning the technique, the method. That's the science of it. But it's art also because it can't be, it doesn't just follow a recipe. Do this, then do this, then do this, then do this, and then you're meditating. No, it's not like starting a car or pushing a button on a machine or following a recipe and baking a cake. So it's part science and part art. So that will be next time. So does what Sri Ramakrishna mentions about torn clothes apply also to inner clothes? I don't know. He's not here for me to ask. But certainly he meant it about the clothes that are showing. Clothes that are showing. So that much we can say. And then if we seek the one only, can we skip individual deities like Lakshmi and trust that the one will give us all that we truly need? Yes, surely. No one needs to worship Lakshmi. Otherwise, places where Lakshmi is not worshipped would be in big trouble. And in India also, a large number of people, they don't pay any special attention to Lakshmi. So no, Lakshmi is one of the deities one can worship if one feels so inclined. And the image being there, as I said, it's a beautiful image which is a positive psychological image, a positive influence on the psyche of a culture. But it's not necessary. None of the deities are necessary, even for spiritual life. Not one of the deities is necessary. All of them can be delightful. All of them can be helpful if you find them helpful, but none of them are necessary. No ritual is necessary. No scripture is necessary. All that's necessary is to know the truth and to become absorbed in the truth. But if you find a deity helpful in that, if you find a deity more tangible, more expressive, then by all means, they're there for our prayer and meditation and worship. But we don't need any of that to realize the highest. And the actual intent of the question, if we seek just the one, will that provide what we need? Yes, the universe itself will supply what you need. Because the deities are not different from Brahman. They are expressions of Brahman. And so if you seek truth, you don't even need to know the word Brahman. You don't need to know the word the absolute. But if you seek truth, then that will provide all that you need. And this is a comment to share. Just wanted to share the most common girl name, at least in the South India, contains the name of Lakshmi in it. Yes, the Lakshmi is very common as a name or part of a name. Vijaya Lakshmi and many other names with Lakshmi in it. And then names that represent Lakshmi, like Padma and Kamala and so forth. So it's a very, very common name, and for obvious reasons, because it's an auspicious name, a name which brings auspiciousness, a name which brings prosperity, a name which brings good fortune, etc. So, okay. Any questions here? No. Okay. So with that, I'll give a closing chant. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shantihi Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace is in the waters, peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. All is peace. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.